Hi, welcome to Building 3 Company Houses from Carolina Craftsman Kits. These are part of his Zip Kit series, and it includes the needed parts, but no instructions or extra detailed parts. If you take a look at what comes with it, you have all the walls, your strip wood, and your tissue windows, and cardboard roofing. I started by cutting all of my bracing to size using my Ultimation slicer. And I was able to line up all the walls and mark where all my bracing was going to go. Once I had all of my bracing cut, I started to apply it using tacky glue. And now I have all my bracing glued in place. I'll cut out the windows later. Typically, a wooden building like this might have bracing on the inside to hold the walls together and corner trim on the outside. But I wanted to try something that Micromark was offering, and it's a 2-in-1 piece that you can use for holding the walls together and as the outside corner post. This is what a piece of it looks like cut to length. And this is it on end. And here you can see what it looks like held in place with the two walls. So I moved on to distressing the wood and lifting some boards on my clapboard siding, and then using Hunterline driftwood stain to stain all of the wood pieces. And this is what the siding looks like with the stain and the lifted boards. Then I started cutting all of the corner joints, and I needed a lot of them for all 3 kits. Then I soaked them in some driftwood stain to match the walls. For the first house, I dry brushed dolphin gray onto the walls. And this shows how the walls look after the gray has been dry brushed over the driftwood stain. Then I started to glue in my corner posts using tacky glue. I first glued the pieces onto the end walls, and I had to make sure I had all the pieces oriented the same way, with the larger portion to the inside. Then I attached my side walls onto the end walls and made sure that they had a nice strong fit. Then I braced both sets of walls in some 1-2-3 blocks while they were drying. And once they were dry, I took the 2 halves and glued them together and clamped them while they were drying. When I moved onto my windows, I noticed that the smaller one had a piece of trim over it that the larger one didn't. So I just removed that extra trim as I wanted them to all look the same type. I used a scalpel and took it off of all 3 windows for all 3 houses. Then I put all my windows on some masking tape and airbrushed them with a gray primer. I took the doors and windows for the first house and went over them with pewter gray and a sponge for a worn look. Then I added some russet stain and a little bit of gray wash to go over the door. Then I went over the walls again with a light brushing of murky brown over the entire walls, and then a little bit of green stain near the bottom of the walls. Now the second house was going to have white trim with dark walls. So I spray painted the walls with the Krylon camouflage green, and then sprayed the windows and doors and corner trim in a dull white. And I did a little extra distressing on the wood for this house using a wire brush. Even after it had been painted, I went in and added some more wood grain, as you can see on the right. And then I started gluing these walls together the same as I did for the first house. At this point I started cutting and adding a ridge pole into the houses that had already been glued together. It makes them stronger and gives you a good place to glue the roof to. Then I went over the bottom of that building with a raw umber stain. And this is how the first two houses were looking. Now I moved on to the third one. It already had the driftwood stain on it, so I tested some barn red stain on a piece of scrap. And I liked the way it looked, so I put the red stain on these walls over the driftwood. And then I glued these walls together the same way I had the other two. This house was going to get light brown windows and doors to it. And I put another coat of driftwood over the entire house and some more murky brown around the base of it. Now it was time to move on to the roofs. I went ahead and spray painted them all a dark brown. This will be the underside of them once they're put in place. I had decided all of the houses would be on stilts, so I stained a couple pieces of stripwood and then started cutting all of the stilts out. I had put floors in the buildings, but left an opening around to glue the stilts to the inside of the walls. I glued those stilts inside two of the houses, but I wanted them to look different on the third house. So I stained some stripwood differently, and then cut and glued those stilts inside the third house. For the roofing material, I take the construction paper that came in the kit and spray it with a flat black and then an overspray of a mist of a chalky gray. Then I turn it over, cut it into strips, and I put those strips on a piece of wood and go over the edge with a piece of 220 sandpaper. I did a similar process to the different material and glued both of those onto the roofs and glued the roofs onto the houses. But for the third house, I knew I wanted a corrugated metal roof. So I went into my stash of already rusted pieces of corrugated metal and started gluing them onto the cardboard roofing. I went ahead and put some extra bracing inside the house to help hold this roofing on. Next was time to start thinking about the porches. I hadn't completely decided what I wanted each porch to look like, so I put some together and started staining the wood. I was going to let the look of them help me decide what to do with them, but I had to think about it for a while. While I was doing that, I turned the buildings over and started adding rafter tails. I had to cut a lot of little rafter tails and put them inside each roof. But they're worth it when you can see them on the finished model. I moved on to adding the smokestacks. The kit comes with one piece of tubing, but I wanted a variety, so I grabbed a couple other pieces to use. While I was adding the smokestacks in, I also added some trim underneath the gable ends of the houses. And as I was putting the smokestacks in, I also added some flashing around the outside of them. Once I had all my smokestacks in, then it was time to start thinking about the porches again. The first house was going to get a small porch with just a little awning over it. I glued a piece of wood to the bottom of the house to hold the porch onto it, and then made a little awning to go over it. The second house was going to have a porch held up by cinder blocks. I had painted the cinder blocks and then stacked and glued them and glued the porch onto them, and then made some steps also out of cinder blocks. And I glued this onto the front of the house. I decided that the roof on this porch was going to have fallen down. So I grabbed some extra pieces of wood and a few more cinder blocks, and I just piled them up there. Then after this I moved on to the third porch. That one was a full-size porch that also had a roof on it. It was just cardboard with roofing paper and a couple of posts to hold it up. And I wanted to add some corrugated metal underneath the house up against the posts holding it up. So at this point I was done with most of the construction of the houses, and the next thing I was going to do was add the final weathering onto them. For doing this, I like to use powdered artist pigments. They come in a variety of earth tone shades and are very easy to apply and control. I'll usually put out a little pile of the colors I'm going to use, and I have some special brushes. Then I'll just start to brush them on in different areas. I'll use dirt and soil colors for around the base of a house, and I'll use rust colors wherever there's metal, and I'll use some light grays for roofing. And this is how they came out looking after all the weathering. I was going after the look of 3 company houses that had all fallen into disrepair in different ways. And I liked the opportunity that this 3-house kit gave me to do that. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Thank you.